Ever since I started my career, there's been a huge debate between active and passive management. And as I'll show you on the next slide, the numbers for active managers, frankly, just don't look very good. In this video, I'll give you the 2 reasons why active managers have failed to beat their benchmarks over the last 15 or 20 years. And then I'll give you the fix. Yes, I will actually give you the fix to this issue at the end of the video, so you'll want to stick around. So, as I said, if you look at this bar chart here, something has drastically changed over the last about 15 years. Investment performance by active managers has deteriorated drastically. As you can see, before that, from the year 2000 until about 2010, the average outperformance, or the number of managers who outperformed, and yes, this does take into account survivorship bias, was around 50%. To me, that makes intuitive sense. It's about a coin flip. The average active manager will probably meet the benchmark. Anyone above it will outperform. However, something has drastically changed. The number of managers, on average, per year, that are underperforming their benchmark, specifically we're talking about large caps here, has approached 70% over the last 15 years. That is a huge problem. Only 32%, if we're going to say this differently, of large cap active managers on average per year outperform their benchmark. And it's no wonder why so many people are migrating to more passive investment strategies, both for the cost and because if you're going to pay an active manager who doesn't outperform, that's double as bad. So in this video, we're going to talk about the 2 reasons why. Reason number 1, slowing growth. Reason number 2, shorter holding periods or more stock turnover. And then finally, in the last section, I will give you the fix and why I'm honestly a little optimistic about the future of the industry. So reason number 1, growth has slowed over the preceding decades. So if you look at the bar chart here on the left, you can see U.S. real GDP growth quarter over quarter on average. From 1980 to 1999, it averaged 3.7%. 2000 to 2008, 2.6%. And then since 2008, it's been at 1.7%. So a huge decline in the growth of the country overall. And that has also played a role in high growth companies. Makes sense. If the economy isn't growing as fast, it's going to be hard to have more and more companies that are growing quickly. Specifically here, we're looking at the S&P 500 with companies with long-term sales growth greater than 15%. As you can see, since 2000, the number of high growth companies has fallen substantially. And it's much harder to outperform when all the managers are chasing the same number of high growth stocks. So the less there is to choose from, the more herding, the more piling in, the worse valuation you're getting. And that's part of what we've seen over the last 15 years. And I can show you this correlation here on this page. So as you can see, there's a small positive correlation between the number of S&P 500 companies with long-term sales growth greater than 15% and the percent of large cap active managers that beat their benchmark. So when there's more high growth companies to choose from, skillful managers have more names to pick that can differentiate themselves from their peers and lead to outperformance. However, on the left side of the chart, you can see when there are less companies to pick from, there are less high growth companies. Everyone's piling into the same name. It's harder to differentiate yourself. And in this instance, in the slower growth backdrop, that's when macro dominates. Managers are not trained for how to invest in slower growth backdrops. And that's something we're going to talk about in section 3. So what's reason number 2? Well, I told you at the beginning, but holding periods have shortened substantially since the 1960s. So the average holding period in 1960, as you can see, was 8.3 years. That sounds almost crazy today. Now, obviously, some of this is due to technology and such, but that is such a large number compared to today, which is under a year, 0.6 years, right? So we're talking 6 or 7 months at this point is the average holding period for stocks. And what does that do? Well, shorter holding periods magnify the importance of the business cycle. And I'll show you two examples on the following two slides of how this makes sense. So, example number one, we're going to start from on the left chart here, January 2008. On the right chart, January 2009. So a year difference. Now, both of these charts look pretty good. So in January 2008, you bought right before the market turned significantly lower. But at the end of this chart, if you held for 8 years, like was the average holding period in the 1960s, it was still a profitable trade. So the longer holding periods shrinks the business cycle impact. It matters less when you enter in a given business cycle if you're going to hold over sometimes multiple business cycles. So exactly where you enter in the one business cycle doesn't necessarily matter if you're going to be there for multiple business cycles. Now, obviously, you'd prefer to be the chart on the right here if you could perfectly time entering the market. But the point here is both of these charts delivered positive returns. Both of these investments delivered positive returns for their investors. But then you look at something like this. So we're going to reduce it down to 1 year holding periods from those same entry points. So on the left, if you did January 2008 and held for 1 year, which is even longer than the current average holding period is, you would see your investment go down 38% at the end of that year. If you had entered a year later in January 2009, you would have held for a 23% return over that year. So managers really need to be trained in how to identify where they're at in the business cycle and make macro-driven investment decisions based on that information. And unfortunately, that is just not something that investors have been trained to do. So as growth has slowed and as the holding period has shrunk, it has created an environment where macro is more important than it ever has been before. And as I'll show you, to date, investors have not been trained in how to do that. But that is changing, and that is the good news. Now, I am a CFA charter holder. I love the CFA program. As you can see from the chart here on the left, it is the standard for a career in the investment industry, getting your CFA. And it's continued to get a bigger following throughout the decades, as you can see from the chart on the left. However, for the longest time, the CFA curriculum did not include much macro, and this is not surprising. Again, macro was not a big part of anyone's education, specifically applied macro. Previously, macro was for economists and stock pickers focused on bottom-up fundamentals, and there wasn't really much in the middle. However, the CFA, the great organization that they are, noticed this trend changing and did something about it. And that's where we come in. So we developed the practical skills module for level 3, the practical macro practical skills module that current level 3 candidates are taking as a part of the CFA program. It is taken directly from level 1. It is a condensed version of level 1 of the macro specialist designation, which is our program. And what we do at the Macro Institute is any CFA candidate or CFA charter holder who does the macro PSM. So if you're a charter holder now, you can actually go back through your learning center and take the macro PSM. Anyone who takes this and sends us proof can actually skip level 1 of our program. And so this is why I am personally so optimistic about the future for active managers. Us at the Macro Institute, we recognize the value of macro. We have a whole professional designation program about it. But the CFA, now that the CFA has recognized its value, more and more active managers are going to be introduced to macro. And we're very happy to be some of the people that are providing that content to them. And that's why we have this special offer for CFAs who have completed our PSM. And then here is the macro specialist designation. Again, why am I optimistic? When I was coming up, there was no professional designation program that actually taught applied macro. So how do you invest in slow growth backdrops? How do you invest when the business cycle is more important than ever because people aren't holding stocks for as long as they used to? Well, now we have a designation for that. It is the macro specialist designation. We have two levels. Level one is called the essentials of applied macro. Here you're going to learn all the important types of data, the relationships they have with each other, how to forecast certain series and what they mean for investment returns. To me, level one is my favorite, and that is part of what's the macro PSM for the CFA level threes. And then for level two, we give you two options. Path A global approach to portfolio strategy, and path B is our quant path. So translating macro into micro. Path A is more for your traditional portfolio manager. We do a deep dive in every S&P sector, as well as different foreign countries, the structural backdrops of different investing environments. So when I'm talking about slow growth, you're going to hear a lot of that here. And then path B is all about if you want to be a quantitative analyst. So we have options for people based on your interest. If you want to break the trend of active managers failing to beat their benchmarks and passive dominating the industry, I strongly encourage you to get a better understanding of applied macroeconomics. And that is what we teach you here at the Macro Institute. So if you're interested, I'll have the link to our programs in the description of this video. Feel free to reach out to me anytime on LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer questions. And that's what I'm going to leave you with today. I appreciate you all being here. I hope you have a great week, and I will see you here next Monday for another Macro Monday video.